Fam, this is pretty crazy. The chief of South Africa's Navy just slammed the government. Take a look at this clip and we'll unpack it in more detail, along with a lot that happened today at the Madlanga Commission.
For our cabinet to approve the reduction of the SNDF workforce or strength is actually nothing far from telling us to implement a defense version of what General Mkhwanazi has disclosed in the Madlanga Commission with regards to the closure of the political killing task team. Closing down the SNDF is like having a house without walls, effective CCTV systems, and reaction capability should thieves violate your space uninvited, or buying a car and not taking an insurance, or not having a life cover for yourself and family.
SMWX fam, if you ever need to hire a car, check out Pace Car Rental, a proudly South African company with the best range of cars for any need. Whether you need a car for a day, a month, or long term, Pace makes it simple and easy with flexible payment options including cash, card, or EFT. From bakkies to minibuses, they've got you covered. But here's the best part. Because you watch SMWX, use promo code SMWX for 5% off your next rental. Now, let's get back to it. So who is that? That's Admiral Lobese, who is the head of South Africa's Navy. This is serious business. South Africa's command structure goes Commander-in-Chief President Ramaphosa, Minister of Defense, Chiefs of Staff, and you have the Chiefs of the Services. And Admiral Lobese is one of those for the Navy. So where was he speaking? He was speaking at the SA Navy Gala concert over the weekend and adding his voice to a number of people in South Africa's security cluster who have cast serious doubts over the intentions of the South African government when it comes to keeping citizens safe. Now, he said a number of quite shocking things in the speech, in addition to what he said there. Firstly, he said, he finds himself questioning whether those responsible for making significant decisions, particularly regarding the funding of our defense force, have been directly or indirectly influenced by drug cartels, illegal traders, maritime criminals, and human traffickers. He further went on to say, because it will appear that these consistent underfunding and incapacitating of the South African Navy and the Defence Force in general is to ensure the success of the operations that undermine our nation. And one last thing is, he said, the unpatriotic and what appears to be sellout posture of defunding the SA Navy and the SANDF leaves me with the question of whether the people behind what I would like to call this nonsense, if they were not busy with a mission to effectively, and I paraphrase here, undermine the military forces in our country. So choice words, and this was part of a longer speech in which he was speaking about his time in service. He's served South Africa since the age of 17. He spoke about geopolitical threats, about the fact that in the Caribbean, military buildup is taking place. We obviously have the Russia-Ukraine conflict at the moment. So there's a lot happening in the world, and he's saying South Africa shouldn't be blind to the fact that we're in an uncertain military time. He said even that Libya thought it was safe at one point and South Africa could suffer the same fate. He spoke about how the Navy has been brought to its knees, how there was an attempt in some quarters of the government to even privatize the patrolling of South African waters, which has been resisted. But overall, the thrust of his speech was really an attack taking aim at government defunding the institutions which are designed to keep South Africa safe. And really, in a country like ours, we shouldn't know the names of generals and have them making speeches about how worrying things are. But when these generals do start speaking up, admirals and all kinds of people from the criminal justice system to the defense system, it really does paint a picture that the criminal justice system, the defense system, is trying to ring the alarm in South Africa. And this isn't the first time. I want you to take a look at what the Surgeon General of the SANDF, Njabeni Mapaha, said earlier this year.
In terms of economics and geopolitics, and therefore we are considered a big brother. No, you cannot be a big brother if you are unable to wield a stick that will make people be afraid. Now you may be asking yourself, what is he talking about and all that? How many of you will build a beautiful and expensive house and not fence it and protect it? I don't think none of you will do that. Constitutionally, the South African National Defence Force is mandated to protect and defend the country. Now, any home will display its character, its worthiness, by the level of security that it places around it. Now, if we're going to play big brother in Africa, and therefore what we give for the Defence Force should symbolize that. A lot has been said about the South African National Defence Force not being well equipped, not being resourced and all that. I'm not going to get into that, but I'm saying, and I'm appealing to the politicians that are here, that next time you sit down and debate, think whether you are protected or not. Because that grant that you're giving to the people out there, the education of your children and everything else will not materialize if you're not protected. I'm sure many of you know that we are sharing our grants for the poor with people who are not supposed to share the grant. And that is because we are not protected. Our borders are porous. And they're porous because you, the politicians, have decided you want a Mickey Mouse Defence Force. I'm sorry to say that. And by the way, the Adjutant General is here. I'm protected. I'm not making a political speech, by the way.
Mickey Mouse Defence Force, because you, the politicians, have decided that. Choice words, and of course, this comes in the context of General Mkhwanazi's speech, which continued this theme in July this year, where he spoke about criminal syndicates infiltrating the highest reaches of the criminal justice system and South Africa's government. So clearly, there is dissatisfaction in the ranks of some very powerful security figures in South Africa. It reminds me of my interview with Lukhona Mnguni, in which he foresaw that this was a problem and reminded us of what had been said. So these aren't the only figures who have made these statements. Others from South Africa's military establishment have also made statements around DRC. All this to say that it is quite disquieting and disconcerting, not just that these people feel the need to speak out, but that they are trying to tell us that there could be some kind of systematic attempt to weaken South Africa against the threats of the drug trade and organized crime in our country, which leads us to believe, potentially, that the weakness we have towards crime in South Africa is not just a function of not being able to deal with it, but there is some kind of complicity and even benefiting from these organized criminal networks within those who make powerful decisions. We've heard it from Navy, we've heard it from police, we've heard it from some places in the SANDF. So a concerning time and a concerning moment for the country as people continue to speak out, warning us about how serious the stakes are. And of course, within that broader context, we've got the Madlanga Commission going on. And today we heard a story about those famous dockets that were in the possession of the PKTT, got moved back to Gauteng and were placed under Shadrach Sibia. And various of his subordinates really, we heard today what they did with those dockets, which wasn't very much actually. So who do we hear from today? Firstly, we heard from Mary Mutsipe, who's the component head of serious and violent crimes. She ultimately reports to Shadrack Sibia, the suspended Deputy National Commissioner who Mkhwanazi has accused of turning a blind eye to organized crime, if not benefiting from it. Now, she was the person who actually received these dockets when they were stripped from the PKTT and placed into Gauteng's possession and National's possession. And really, the crazy thing we found today was that all that happened was that there was some kind of audit done on these dockets. And when General Mkhwanazi was saying that these dockets were metaphorically gathering dust, the testimony today kind of substantiated that, because it seems that they were in an office, they were being audited to see what had happened with these cases and these dockets, but very little seems to have happened after that. And Justice Madlanga really asked why did it seem that all you were doing was just auditing these dockets, and then eventually there was some plan that a new team from National would then go into KZN and pretty much do exactly what the Political Killings Task Team was already doing, because they now had their dockets, which just speaks to a serious mess, a serious incoherence in the criminal justice system, in the police, where you have one task team that's already been set up to do one thing, but then because of infighting, dockets get taken away from them, and then a new team does or is proposed to do parallel work, but it just wouldn't have made sense for another team to go into KZN to do what the PKTT was already doing. So that was bizarre, and Madlanga again asked just why would that happen? Why not just let the PKTT that was set up for that do it anyway? We then had a senior member of the PKTT, Lieutenant Colonel Col Khumalo. And Khumalo's perspective was really interesting for a number of reasons. We'll get back to the dockets, but he gave us insight into how some of this organized crime and political crime, political killings actually happened. And he spoke about how there's a very systematic structure of hitmen being contracted by what are called facilitators above them, who serve as intermediaries between the hitmen and usually the people who are ordering the hit, who could be senior politicians in their region or powerful business people. And he took us into the world of how these negotiations happen, how the people who order have to get the coordinators, and the coordinators then have to marshal the resources, firearms, vehicles, spotters to follow people over months, and then eventually they carry out these terrifying acts of murder on political targets.
And I first took a phone and phoned the project coordinator, because one of my roles as the Majok commander was to liaise, be a liaising officer between the team, the project coordinator, which is General Khumalo, and obviously accounting at the same time to the Provincial Commissioner, Lieutenant General Mkhwanazi. But my immediate commander then, it was Lieutenant General Khumalo as the project coordinator. I phoned him and I said, Mphathi, ngibone enye into la. Kwenze njani? And he said, Khumalo, I'm sure guys you are shocked. But address the members and tell them that we are dealing with this matter. We don't know how this letter came about, because there was no official communication with us. We perhaps think this is not true. Therefore, I then called the commanders, because I felt like, let me first talk to the commanders and they go and talk to the members. If the members still don't understand, that's when I will call the whole team. And the comments that I heard from the commanders were not nice. They were it damaged them. It left scars. Because there were cases that were remanded beginning of January. There were cases that were on the trial stage. Other members, they were out working on the 31st when this letter surfaced. And if you are sitting with a person of interest, sitting with a witness and he sees this, he tells you straight away that
effectively, he showed us that there is a professional industry of contract killing, which is extremely worrying because this has now gone from, a political favor to a full-blown economy of death and murder in South Africa, which has a sophisticated structure. And, sometimes you just get shocked when you listen to this stuff. Members of the PKTT and the police themselves have been attacked. Imagine having the confidence to be like, you know what, the police are an inconvenience. We're just going to attack them now. And Khumalo spoke about, and bear in mind, this is a different Khumalo to General Khumalo, the head of crime intelligence. This is someone who is leading troops on the ground, so to speak, for the PKTT, Ntate Khumalo. And he was speaking about some of their operations, and he spoke about 3 separate occasions where the political killings task team was targeted for assassination. Now, thankfully, they didn't suffer any casualties in these moments, but people were shot at. People suffered injuries, and they were shot at coming out of operations while they were driving on the road. One was where they stopped at a garage and someone just opened fire on them and they were able to neutralize that person. So the police themselves are in a battle here, and they can lose their lives, and people can just decide, if you're investigating us and we don't like it, we will send someone to get you. What was also quite concerning was that he revealed that where the PKTT was attacked, there were other police involved in those attacks. So it was in some ways an inside job. Members of the police would provide firearms. Sometimes they themselves would, like one of them who was shot in one of these operations in defense, turned out he was a member of the police. So there's this internecine war within the police, where organized crime is able to contract members of the police to harm other members of the police. It's really wild what we're witnessing here. And when serious senior people tell you this stuff, it's one thing if it's some conspiracy theorist telling you this. But when people who are in authority, who have gone through these experiences, or senior military leaders, like we heard in the first segment, you can't help but take notice. So we had quite the day at the Madlanga Commission today, and I believe we'll continue to hear more about the political killings task team and the dockets this week. Meanwhile, in Parliament, we'll hear from more witnesses tomorrow, and that should be quite interesting to watch how that unfolds. One other thing I wanted to reflect on was this weekend we heard President Ramaphosa, or we heard a leak from the NEC, suggesting that President Cyril Ramaphosa had dared his critics within the party to give him a date of resignation. Now, this is curious to me for a number of reasons. Why, firstly, we know it was leaked and we know it was probably intentionally leaked, but why would you want to leak that you are daring your competitors to resign? Well, one reason is you want to make it seem like you look strong. And sure, I think President Ramaphosa right now probably has or is presenting a relatively strong grip over the ANC. It's quite easy to present a strong grip because he employs as president a lot of the people who are in the NEC. But sometimes in your bid to look strong, you can inadvertently look weak. And I find it strange that even this conversation about his resignation is just not going away. It's been rumbling on for weeks now. And a week or so ago, we had people around him coming out and saying all this talk of Ramaphosa's resignation is just baseless. It's rumors. But then the rumors were confirmed that at least some people in the ANC are pushing for this, because we heard that Ramaphosa himself has dared those people who are challenging him to resign to come out of the woodwork. And the problem for any president is, as soon as conversations around your resignation start happening, whether you are batting them off or whether you are looking defiant and daring people to tell you when you should resign, as soon as the conversation about resignation starts happening, that is not a good place in which you want to be. In President Ramaphosa's first term, he was so strident that the very idea of resignation was just an impossibility, right? At least for, say, the first 3 years. But now we come to a situation where this talk of his resignation is just like a constant theme of our politics. So I just found it a bit interesting that this would be leaked. And I'm not sure what the aim was here. Maybe one of the aims could be, of course, the ANC has a big meeting coming up in December with its National General Council, and Ramaphosa and others in the ANC may be moving to stabilize the situation before the NGC and not give people any ideas to disrupt or protest or try to raise the issue. But in my own analysis, I'm not so sure that this statement was the show of strength which it may have been intended to be. But let's keep a close eye on this issue. I've got an interesting set of interviews coming up this week in which people reflect to some extent on it, so keep an eye out for that. Other than that, like, share, subscribe, help us reach 400,000 subscribers. Get yourself some SMWX merch at smwx.store, and make sure you keep tuning in, and I'll see you on the next one, fam. Have a good night, a good day, wherever you're watching, and keep it locked on SMWX. Aye.